There's a castle in northern England that roughly 250,000 people visit every year. Most of them are there for the same reason. This is where Harry Potter learned to fly. They walk the same courtyard where Neville Longbottom crashed his broomstick. They take the same photo under the same stone archway. Almost none of them ask the obvious question: who actually owns this place? The answer is the same family that has owned it since 1309, and for centuries they've been one of the most powerful landowning dynasties in northern England. There's a good chance you've never heard their name. By the end of this video, you'll understand why. This is the story of the Percy family, the Dukes of Northumberland. If you know one thing about them, it's probably Alnwick Castle. If you know two things, the second is usually Harry Potter. What almost nobody knows is the other part, that this is one of the oldest continuously powerful landowning families in England, that they once fielded private armies to defend the entire northern border against Scotland, and that the man who holds their name today came within one broken bloodline of never holding it at all. The scale is worth sitting with for a moment. Northumberland Estates, the modern business built on the family's land, still manages somewhere in the region of 80,000 to 100,000 acres depending on how you count it, across Northumberland and the Scottish borders. Around 100 tenant farmers work land that Percy families have controlled, in some cases for over 7 centuries. There's forestry, there's commercial property, there's a portfolio that now stretches into London, Switzerland, Germany and the United States. The current Duke was valued by the Sunday Times at just over £500 million. Walk down any street in Britain and ask 10 people who the Duke of Northumberland is. You'll be lucky to get one correct answer. This family didn't survive nearly 1,000 years by being loud. They survived by being useful to whoever was in charge, and when that failed, by being too dangerous to remove. To understand how that happened, you have to go back to the beginning, before the castle, before anyone in England had ever heard the name Percy at all. The Percys weren't English, they were Norman. The name comes from Percy on Auge, a small manor in Normandy that gave the family its surname before they ever set foot in Britain. A knight named William de Percy crossed the Channel around the time of the Norman conquest and, like most of William the Conqueror's followers, was rewarded with land, first in Yorkshire and Lincolnshire, nowhere near the northeastern border that would eventually define the family. He founded Whitby Abbey. He built a base, and by the time England's new rulers sat down to catalogue exactly who owned what in the Domesday Survey, William de Percy was already one of the largest landholders in the country. It took until the early 1300s for the family to arrive where the story actually gets interesting. In 1309, Henry de Percy, the first Baron Percy, bought Alnwick Castle from the Bishop of Durham. On paper, that's a real estate transaction. In practice, it was a declaration. Northumberland in the 14th century wasn't a peaceful county with good scenery. It was the most dangerous stretch of land in England, a permanent low-grade war zone 30 miles from a hostile Scottish border, raided so often that the border wars there lasted, on and off, for more than 300 years. The English crown had a problem. Defending that border with royal troops was expensive, slow, and politically awkward. So the monarchy did something that would define the next 400 years of Percy power. It outsourced the job. The Percys became Wardens of the Marches, a title that sounds ceremonial, and was anything but. In practice, it meant the family got to keep ransoms from captured Scottish nobles, raise and arm their own private forces, and operate with a level of independence most English barons never had. The crown got border security without the bill. The Percys got wealth, land, and something close to their own private kingdom in the north. It worked spectacularly, for one very good reason. The Percys were genuinely excellent at war. The most famous of them earned his nickname from the enemy. Henry Percy, Harry Hotspur to Shakespeare and to history, fought the Scots so relentlessly and attacked with such speed that his opponents started calling him Hotspur as a mark of grudging respect. In 1388, at the Battle of Otterburn, Hotspur's forces clashed with a Scottish raiding party under the Earl of Douglas, in the dark. Douglas was killed. Hotspur was captured and ransomed. 14 years later, at Homildon Hill, Hotspur returned the favour, crushing a Scottish invasion and taking half their nobility prisoner. Then it all went wrong, in the way these stories usually do. Not because the Percys lost to their enemies, but because they turned on their friends. Hotspur and his father had helped put Henry IV on the throne. When the king failed to pay them what he owed and refused to ransom a captured relative, the Percys decided the king they'd made could be unmade. They rebelled. In 1403, at the Battle of Shrewsbury, Hotspur was killed in the fighting. 23 years older, incidentally, than the young Prince Hal that Shakespeare has him duelled to the death, a detail the plays quietly skip over. 5 years later, his father died the same way, cut down at Bramham Moor after a second failed rising against the crown. This became the pattern. Over the following 2 centuries, the Percys backed the wrong side of the Wars of the Roses and lost an earl at the Battle of Towton. They led a doomed Catholic rebellion against Elizabeth I in 1569, the Rising of the North, that ended with the 7th Earl beheaded in York, his head left on a spike at Micklegate Bar for 2 years, as a warning to anyone else who got ideas. A cousin of a later Earl helped plan the Gunpowder Plot, which put the 9th Earl in the Tower of London for 15 years on suspicion alone, time he spent building one of the great private libraries in England and earning the nickname the Wizard Earl. Every generation, Percys came close to destroying themselves, and every generation, somehow the family came back. Through all of it, one building stayed constant, Alnwick Castle. It had actually existed before the Percys, a fortress first built around 1096 by a rival Norman family, but from 1309 onward it became the seat of Percy power, rebuilt and expanded across the following centuries into what's now the second largest inhabited castle in England, beaten only by Windsor. It had 400-year gaps of near abandonment and Georgian-era rebuilding sprees. It has survived sieges, neglect, restoration, and, in the 20th century, a stint as a teacher training college and a wartime evacuation site for schoolgirls from Newcastle. But if you ask most people who are under 40 what Alnwick Castle actually is, they won't mention any of that. They'll tell you it's Hogwarts. In 2000 and 2001, the production behind the first 2 Harry Potter films needed somewhere that looked exactly like a 1,000-year-old wizarding school, somewhere with real stone, real history, and courtyards big enough to stage a flying lesson. Alnwick's Outer Bailey became the field where Harry first learned to fly a broomstick. The Inner Bailey is where the Weasleys' flying car crash lands in the second film. The castle's Lion Arch became one of the main gates in and out of the school grounds. It changed everything about how the world sees this place. Alnwick had been a well-regarded stately home before Harry Potter. Afterward, it became a pilgrimage site. Today it pulls in something in the region of 250,000 paying visitors a year, and Harry Potter is very often the reason they came. Downton Abbey later filmed its Christmas specials there. Transformers used it. So did Dungeons & Dragons. But nothing moved the numbers the way a boy wizard on a broomstick did. This isn't nostalgia for the family running it, it's revenue. Alnwick Castle and its gardens are now core to the estate's business model, sitting alongside farming, forestry and commercial property as one of the pillars keeping this 7th century operation solvent in the 21st century. The Percys didn't just happen to own a famous filming location. They turned a medieval fortress into one of the most valuable pieces of tourism infrastructure in the north of England, without ever having to build anything new. The castle was already there. All it needed was a movie, which brings us to the question this whole documentary has been quietly building toward. Because everything you've just heard, the Norman Knight, the Border Wars, Hotspur, the rebellions, the executions, 15 years in the Tower, all of it describes one unbroken bloodline. Now, before we get into exactly how that happened, because this is one of the strangest inheritance stories in British aristocratic history, it's worth knowing that this is part of an ongoing series on the families who've quietly run entire regions of Britain for centuries, the Cadogans in Chelsea, the Crown's own Duchy of Cornwall, and now the Percys in the north. If that's the kind of history you want more of, subscribe to the channel and you won't miss where we go next. Now, back to Alnwick. In 1670, the male line of the Percy family and the blood-descended Percy line that had held Alnwick since 1309 ran out. The last Earl of that line, Jocelyn Percy, died leaving no son. What he left instead was a daughter, Elizabeth, who inherited the vast Percy estates and eventually married into the Seymour family, the Dukes of Somerset. For 3 generations, the Percy lands, Alnwick, the titles, the Northern Power Base, sat inside a family that wasn't named Percy at all. Then, in the middle of the 18th century, history repeated a trick it had already pulled once before, 500 years earlier, when the original Percy line had also failed and been carried forward by a daughter's husband taking the name. This time the daughter was Elizabeth Seymour. Her father, the Duke of Somerset, had no legitimate son to inherit, so his will contained an unusual instruction. The Percy titles and estates would pass to his son-in-law, a Yorkshire baronet named Sir Hugh Smithson. Smithson had married into the family. He hadn't been born into it, and under the terms of that inheritance, he did what the law required and what ambition frankly made easy. He changed his name, by Act of Parliament. Sir Hugh Smithson became Sir Hugh Percy. In 1750 he inherited the earldom, and apparently an earldom wasn't enough for him. When the court offered him a marquisate instead of the dukedom he wanted, he pushed back until George III relented. In 1766, Hugh Smithson was created the first Duke of Northumberland. Every Duke of Northumberland since, every single one, down to the man who owns Alnwick Castle today, descends from that marriage, not from William de Percy, the Norman knight who crossed the Channel 700 years ago, from a Yorkshire gentleman named Smithson, who married well and then legally erased his own name to claim someone else's. It's worth being fair to him here. Elizabeth Seymour genuinely was a Percy descendant. However, many generations removed through the female line, and marrying into a name to continue it was exactly how the Percys themselves had survived their first extinction back in the 1100s. This wasn't theft. It was the oldest trick the aristocracy had, using marriage to keep a name alive when blood alone couldn't do it. But it does mean something worth sitting with. The Duke of Northumberland living in Alnwick Castle right now, Ralph Percy, the 12th Duke, carries the Percy name, the Percy titles, and the Percy history in every official record and every history book. Genealogically, his ancestor is a man who was born a Smithson, and decided at considerable political effort that he would rather be something else. The family didn't survive 1,000 years unbroken. It survived by being willing to change its own bloodline whenever the alternative was disappearing entirely. That tells you more about how power actually endures in Britain than any battle ever could. Northumberland Estates, the corporate structure that now manages the family's land and assets, runs farming and forestry operations across the northeast, works with roughly 100 tenant farmers on agricultural land, and manages thousands of hectares of commercial woodland. But the acreage is really just the foundation. On top of it sits a property development and investment arm with offices not just in Newcastle, but in London and Switzerland, and operational reach into Germany and the United States. This is a family that has quietly become an international commercial property investor, while most of the public still pictures them in tweed, walking a grouse moor. The numbers move around year to year, the way any real business does. In one recent set of accounts, group revenue came in at around £65 million, with rental income holding steady at over £13 million. In another division's more recent filing, profit before interest and tax leapt from £8 million to over £17 million in a single year, even against a backdrop of high inflation and rising interest rates, largely on the back of renegotiated leases and new commercial development. It isn't a museum. It's a business that happens to have a 1,000-year-old logo. The current Duke, Ralph Percy, was educated at Eton and Oxford, and studied land management at Reading before taking over the running of the estate. He inherited the title in 1995, after the sudden death of his older brother, the 11th Duke, at just 42. The Sunday Times places his personal fortune at somewhere around £509 million, a figure that puts him among the wealthiest people in the northeast of England, but one that undersells the point slightly. The land and the titles aren't really personal wealth in the way a bank balance is. They're a machine, built to be handed intact to the next generation, the way it's been handed down, one way or another, for 7 centuries. That handover is already underway. His son, George Percy, Earl Percy, is the heir apparent, and rather than simply waiting to inherit a castle, he currently runs a geothermal energy company. It's a strange, quietly telling detail. The family whose fortune was built on medieval land grants and coal royalties 2 centuries ago now has its next generation working in renewable energy. The methods change. The instinct to hold on to northern land and stay economically relevant to whoever needs what you've got, that hasn't moved at all. It hasn't all been smooth. In 2012, a flood in Newburn, caused by the failure of a culvert the estate was responsible for, led to a £15 million art sale in 2014 just to cover the damages, a reminder that even an estate this size isn't liquid cash sitting in a vault. And in 2015, the family drew genuine public anger in London when they moved to redevelop a set of allotments in Hounslow that families had worked since the First World War, reportedly telling holders that press coverage of the dispute could cost them access to the land altogether. The plans were eventually blocked by planning authorities in 2023. It's a useful corrective to any story that makes this family sound purely heroic. They're landlords as much as custodians, and not every tenant, 500 years or 5 years into the relationship, has loved the experience. So, how does a family last nearly 1,000 years? Not by winning every fight. The Percys lost plenty: Otterburn, Shrewsbury, Bramham Moor, the Rising of the North. 15 years in the Tower over a plot they may not have even known about. Not by staying rich the same way either. Coal royalties gave way to rental income, and rental income is now giving way to renewable energy and international property. And, as it turns out, not even by staying in the same family. When the bloodline ran out in the 17th century, and then again in the 18th, the name survived by absorbing whoever married in and was willing to carry it forward. What actually stayed constant was something closer to an instinct. Hold the land, make yourself useful to whoever's in charge, and when the ground shifts, adapt the business rather than the location. Warden of the Marches becomes tenant, farming becomes tourism, becomes commercial property, becomes renewable energy. Different jobs, same postcode, same family name stretched over the top of all of it. Like a flag that's been restitched so many times none of the original fabric is left. And yet it's unmistakably still the same flag. Alnwick Castle is still standing. The Percy name is still on the door. Nearly 1,000 years after a Norman knight first landed in England, his descendants, or more accurately the descendants of the family that later married to keep his name alive, are still deciding what happens to a significant slice of northern England. Most people who walk through that castle gate each year are thinking about Harry Potter, maybe now. A few more of them will wonder who's actually still living upstairs. If this video changed the way you think about who actually owns the ground you're standing on, it's worth knowing this isn't the only estate in Britain built to survive centuries by any means necessary. Our documentary on the Duchy of Cornwall goes inside one of the strangest land arrangements in the country. Go watch that one next.